There is a version of Meryl Streep the world has always been allowed to see. The version who glides through award ceremonies with effortless grace, who speaks with measured eloquence in every interview, who has spent 5 decades being described in the same breath as words like legend, icon, and greatest of her generation. She is the actress who transforms completely into every role, who never seems rattled, who never seems petty, who appears to exist on some elevated plane above the usual Hollywood noise of ego and rivalry. But that version, polished and carefully maintained, is only part of the story. Because behind the composure, behind the Golden Globes and the Oscar speeches and the diplomatic smiles at industry galas, Meryl Streep has carried something. A quiet ledger of frustrations, disappointments, and genuine personal grievances built up across decades of working alongside some of the most powerful and difficult personalities in the history of cinema. She never shouted those feelings into a microphone. She never gave a tabloid the headline they were fishing for. She simply held them, gracefully and tightly, the way only a woman of extraordinary self-discipline can. Until now. At 76, something has shifted in Meryl Streep. Perhaps it is the particular freedom that comes with having nothing left to prove. Perhaps it is the clarity that age offers when the noise of ambition finally quiets down. Whatever the reason, in a series of rare and unusually candid moments over the past year, Streep has let certain truths surface. Not with bitterness. Not with the sharp edge of score settling. But with a quiet, almost surgical honesty that has left the film industry genuinely stunned. Because the names she has allowed to slip through her famously guarded exterior are not minor co-stars or forgettable collaborators. They are giants. Men and one woman whose legacies are woven into the very fabric of American cinema. People audiences assumed she admired, respected, or at the very least tolerated with grace. What follows is the full story. 6 actors. 6 chapters of professional tension and personal injury, finally brought into the light. To understand why Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin were destined to clash, you have to understand what acting means to each of them at the deepest level. For Streep, a scene is a living organism that must be studied, dissected, and understood before it is ever performed. She arrives on set having already lived inside her character for months. Every line reading, every pause, every physical gesture has been examined from multiple angles until the most truthful version rises to the surface. There is no room in her process for randomness, because to Streep, randomness is a form of disrespect, to the material, to the audience, and to her fellow actors. Alec Baldwin operates from an entirely different philosophy. He is a man of the moment. His best work tends to erupt spontaneously, fueled by instinct and an almost reckless willingness to follow impulse wherever it leads. He has always believed that over-rehearsal kills the unpredictable spark that makes a performance feel genuinely alive. For Baldwin, the script is a suggestion, not a contract. When the two were cast together in Nancy Meyer's romantic comedy It's Complicated in 2009, the director hoped their contrasting energies would produce an intriguing on-screen dynamic. What she got instead was a production quietly divided against itself. Cast and crew who were present during filming have since described an atmosphere of barely contained tension in rehearsal rooms, where Streep's visible frustration with Baldwin's habit of rewriting dialogue mid-scene was met with his cheerful indifference to her displeasure. Streep never erupted publicly. That is not her way. But those close to the production recall her saying, in a voice that carried far more weight than its even tone suggested, that comedy only works when it is built on something real and that without a foundation of emotional honesty, improvisation becomes self-indulgence dressed up as spontaneity. Baldwin, characteristically, found the whole situation amusing. He later acknowledged the friction with a grin, suggesting that Streep had perhaps taken the material more seriously than the material required. The comment, intended as light-hearted, landed in Streep's world as confirmation of everything she had suspected. They have not worked together since. Streep has quietly passed on multiple projects where Baldwin was already attached. The feud never made front pages because neither of them allowed it to. But in the small, closely watched world of Hollywood's elite, the distance between them has always been understood. The collaboration between Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline on Sophie's Choice in 1982 should have been one of the great creative partnerships of that era. Both were deeply serious artists. Both came from rigorous theatrical backgrounds. Both had a reputation for bringing extraordinary commitment to complex material. On paper, the pairing was nearly perfect. In practice, it became one of the most quietly damaging professional relationships of Streep's early career. The fracture point was preparation. For Sophie's Choice, Streep underwent a level of research and character construction that is still discussed with something close to reverence in acting circles. She immersed herself in Holocaust survivor testimonies. She worked with dialect coaches for months, not simply to acquire an accent, but to understand what it meant for a woman like Sophie to carry two languages inside her body simultaneously, the way the Polish of her childhood and the fractured English of her American displacement each told a different part of her story. For Streep, Sophie's voice was not a cosmetic detail. It was the character's soul made audible. Kevin Kline found this level of preparation baffling. He was, and remains, a naturally gifted actor who tends to trust his instincts over his research. During one rehearsal that those present still remember with a kind of uncomfortable vividness, Kline interrupted Streep mid-preparation to ask, in a tone that he probably intended as collegial, whether she genuinely believed the audience would invest more in her vowel placement than in the raw emotional experience of the scene. It was the wrong question to ask. Not because it was stupid, but because it struck at the precise heart of everything Streep believed about the craft. To her, the vowels and the emotion were not separate categories. The linguistic precision was how the emotion became real, how Sophie's particular history, her culture, her trauma, her identity, could be felt by an audience rather than merely observed. After filming Wrapped, Kline made the additional mistake of describing Streep's method in a press interview as almost academic. He clearly meant it as observation, rather than criticism. Streep heard it as dismissal. The warmth between them, always professional rather than personal, evaporated entirely. She has never accepted a project that would have required working alongside him again, and the industry learned fairly quickly not to pitch ideas that depended on their reunion. Of all the professional tensions in Meryl Streep's long career, the Cold War between her and Jack Nicholson may be the most significant in terms of its impact on Hollywood history, precisely because of everything it prevented from ever existing. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, studios were relentless in their pursuit of a Streep-Nicholson collaboration. The logic was obvious. Two of the greatest screen actors of their generation. Two actors who embodied completely opposite approaches to the craft, her architectural precision against his volcanic spontaneity. Producers believed the collision of those two forces on screen would be genuinely extraordinary. Scripts were developed with both names in mind. Meetings were arranged. Interest was expressed. And then, repeatedly, the conversations collapsed. The reason, as those involved have since described it, was not personal animosity in the traditional sense. It was something more fundamental. Nicholson, who has always worn his contempt for formal technique like a badge of honor, made the mistake of articulating that contempt in terms that were impossible for Streep to look past. His public dismissal of rigorous preparation as intellectual self-indulgence, a remark that made his peers laugh and his admirers nod along appreciatively, landed on Streep like a professional insult of the highest order. She had spent her entire career building the case that serious preparation was not the enemy of authentic performance but its foundation. To hear one of Hollywood's most celebrated and powerful men mock that philosophy in terms designed to provoke a laugh rather than a conversation was, to Streep, a revelation of character more than of artistic belief. She pulled back. Quietly, thoroughly, and permanently. Every subsequent project that arrived with Nicholson's name attached was declined. No argument, no confrontation, no statement. Just a firm and consistent no that required no explanation. Casting directors and producers eventually stopped asking. They have crossed paths at industry events over the decades and maintained a surface cordiality that suggests professionalism without warmth. But the vast body of work they might have created together remains one of Hollywood's most haunting absences. There are professional disagreements, and then there are violations. The line between those two things is not always visible in advance, but it becomes unmistakable the moment it is crossed. On the set of Kramer vs. Kramer in 1979, Dustin Hoffman crossed it, and Meryl Streep never fully forgave him for it. The film, which would go on to win 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture, brought together two actors at very different points in their relationship with the method. Hoffman had by then fully committed to an approach in which the distinction between performance and reality was something to be deliberately eroded. He believed deeply that an actor could only access genuine emotion by creating genuine conditions, which in practice meant that his on-set behavior was often unpredictable, physically aggressive, and entirely indifferent to the comfort and consent of his co-stars. Streep's approach was built on entirely different principles: preparation, precision, and trust. She believed that an actor's power came from depth of understanding rather than from manufactured chaos, and that the relationship between actors on a set had to be founded on mutual respect for the emotional risks being taken. When Hoffman, during an early scene in the production, physically struck Streep without warning and without any prior discussion or consent, the impact went far beyond the physical. What was, in Hoffman's mind, a method technique designed to generate an authentic emotional reaction was, in Streep's experience, a fundamental betrayal of the trust that serious collaborative work requires. She described it in later years with a directness unusual for her, not as a creative choice she disagreed with, but as a transgression she had not been given the chance to refuse. The remainder of the shoot was conducted in a state of professional endurance rather than creative partnership. Hoffman continued to improvise aggressively, to introduce unscripted provocations, and to push the emotional temperature of scenes in ways that director Robert Benton found himself helpless to mediate. Streep absorbed it all, channeled it into a performance of remarkable controlled anguish, and walked away from the experience with wounds that no amount of award recognition could quite heal. She has acknowledged, when pressed, that the film produced real and lasting work. What she has never acknowledged is any gratitude toward the methods that produced it. The distinction matters to her enormously. The tension between Meryl Streep and Gwyneth Paltrow has never been about a single incident or a specific moment of conflict. It is something slower and more structural. A fundamental disagreement about what fame is for and what it ought to cost. Streep came from a tradition in which an actor's credibility was built through the accumulation of difficult work, roles that stretched the imagination, dialects that required months of study, characters that demanded genuine psychological excavation. She earned her reputation one grueling performance at a time, and she has always believed that this is the only honest way to earn it. Paltrow arrived in the 1990s with extraordinary natural gifts but also with a set of advantages that Streep found difficult to look past. Born into Hollywood royalty, connected from childhood to the industry's most powerful figures, celebrated almost from the beginning with a warmth and visibility that felt to Streep disproportionate to what had yet been demonstrated. This was not, from Streep's perspective, a judgment of Paltrow's talent. It was a judgment of a system that rewards proximity to power as readily as it rewards genuine artistic development. The 1999 Academy Awards brought the tension to a head in a way that required no words. Paltrow won Best Actress for Shakespeare in Love. Streep, who had delivered what many considered one of the finest performances of her career in One True Thing, went home empty-handed. She smiled through it with the composure of a woman who had been through enough of these evenings to know how to behave. But those in her circle knew what that smile was covering. In the years that followed, Streep was consistently generous in her public praise of younger actresses she respected: Cate Blanchett, Amy Adams, Jessica Chastain, Viola Davis. She spoke about their work with specific, detailed admiration. Paltrow's name was never among them. The omission was its own kind of statement, and the industry read it clearly.